All right, so now we're going to talk about supply. So in short, kind of you can flip everything you just heard about demand, and most of it will apply to supply. But let's formally dive in. Okay. So just like there was quantity demanded, there's quantity supplied. Okay, and that denotes how much of a good or a service producers are willing to produce for a particular price. Okay. So again, I want to stress that it's for a particular price. So you can't have quantity supplied without some price. Price is the signal. This is all going back to that, right? If you don't know what the price is, you don't know whether or not you should produce something. Okay. All right. So then you have the law of supply, just like the law of demand said that as price increase, demand decreases. Supply is the opposite. As price increases, supply increases. Basically, price for a supplier is what they receive versus for a consumer, it's what they pay, right? So the higher the price for you as a consumer, that's bad for you, right? You don't want to pay high prices for something relative to low prices, right? But for a supplier, it's opposite, right? If I'm making hot dogs and the price of hot dogs increased from $2 to $25, I'm doing all right. In fact, I might tell my buddies to be hot dog suppliers if unless I don't want them to compete with me. But yeah, the higher the price, the more suppliers want to supply. Okay, and then there'll probably be people who weren't supplying that thing before who enter the market. Okay, so the law of supply is the corollary to the law of demand. Supply should shift up. Okay, all right. So if we have a graph, and this is the first time I'm going to ask you this, but you're going to hear it a lot. What goes on the x-axis? You're going to say, what goes on the x-axis? I said quantity. Okay, what goes on the y-axis is price. Okay, and what did I say about supply? Supply, quantity supplied increases as the price increases. Okay, so that's your quantity supplied. And then if I wanted to draw an overlapping demand curve, you can just do this guy. So that'll be your demand, and red is your supply. Okay, and then they kind of coalesce at this point, which I'll define in like 2 slides, but the equilibrium, price and quantity. Okay. So I'm going to repeat this. What goes on the x-axis? Quantity. What goes on the y-axis? Price. What goes on the x-axis? Quantity. What goes on the y-axis? Price. What goes on the x-axis? What goes on the y-axis? What goes on the x-axis? What goes on the y-axis? What goes on the x-axis? What goes on the y-axis? What goes on the x-axis? Quantity. What goes on the y-axis? Price. I can't say it enough. If you put price on the x-axis, I will strangle you. No, I'm not. I'm obviously not going to strangle you. Don't worry. I don't want anybody saying that I threaten them. But yeah, as a rule, price is on the y-axis, quantity is on the x-axis, and the only reason that is the case is because there's no logical reason. It's just that economists have been doing that for as long as at least I've been in the business. Okay. So what are the supply shifters? So just like there are demand shifters, right? So demand shifter, remember. What goes on the x-axis? Quantity. What goes on the y-axis? Price. Okay. A demand shifter, what did that do? Okay. Did it move from here to here? No, right? That's a shift along the same demand curve. Okay. Demand shifter shifted the whole demand curve out or in. Okay. Call this one D2, like the Mighty Ducks. Okay. So a demand shifter shifts the whole graph out or in. Okay, so for the same price, you have a different quantity demanded. Okay, similar for supply shifters. Okay, so here's the supply graph. What goes on the y-axis this time? Price. What goes on the x-axis? Quantity. Good. I presume you guys are paying attention at home. All right. Which way does supply shift? It shifts upward, slopes upwards. Okay. Demand slopes downwards. Law of demand. Supply slopes upwards. Okay. So if I have a supply shifter, okay, something's going to have to move it in or out. Okay. There's little bad boy arrows over here. Okay. These are supposed to be parallel, but it doesn't really matter if it's parallel or not. But I'm just bad at drawing, and they're supposed to be parallel here. But it doesn't matter. Okay, so this is just called S1, and this is S2. Supply shifting out or supply shifting in. Okay. When supply shifts out, what you're saying is for the same price, there's more quantity supplied. Okay. And what does that mean? That means either the same number of people are making more of that good, or more people are making the same number of that good, or like there's more suppliers, or some combination between. So, basically the amount supplied has increased. Okay. If you move it backwards, if you move it inwards, the amount supplied has decreased. Okay. Just like with demand, as you move it away from the origin, as you move it right, okay, or out, the amount demanded is increased. If you move it in, the amount demanded is decreased. So what are the supply shifters? Okay, technological progress. Okay, so when you had monks back in the Middle Ages and they were writing books by hand, how many books do you think were being supplied? Probably not too many. Enough that you can burn a library and lose 99% of of the whole continent's intellectual history, right? The Library of Alexandria. You don't need to know that, obviously. That's just a random historical fact. But back in the day before the printing press, it was really costly to supply a book. It took a lot of time, and you had to be literate and all this stuff. So supply was pretty inwards. Okay, you might be on S1. Then comes the printing press. Then comes mass literacy. Then comes the advent of the typewriter, and then the computer, and then the smartphone. Okay, the amount of things being produced that are like literature has vastly expanded. So for the same price, people might be selling like thousands and thousands and thousands of times more supply. Okay, so that is a shift outwards of supply. Okay, so basically what I'm saying is, as technology progresses and costs go down, supply should increase. Okay, essentially your supply should map pretty closely to or exactly with your willingness to sell, and your willingness to sell is going to be based on your cost. Okay, so as your costs go down, you're more and more willing to sell. Okay, as your costs go down, as technology progresses, you'll be willing to sell more, so quantity supplied should increase. Input prices, exactly the same thing. Let's say you produce corn, right? And you have a certain tractor, and a person operating that tractor. All of a sudden, for that tractor brand, the price decreases to half. Okay, you now can buy twice as many tractors. All right. When you're buying tractors, presumably you're doing so because they're productive in some sort of capacity. So your cost has again gone down. So you're buying twice as many tractors, or your costs stay the same. Your production per cost will go down. Your cost per unit will go down. So you're buying twice as many tractors, you're being more productive, you're supplying more things. Okay, your supply should shift outwards. And if input prices decrease, if your input prices increase so that your cost increases, then your supply should shift inwards. So let's say that the tractor's price is the same, but the person who is driving the tractor all of a sudden says, pay me double. I do a good job. I want double. You're probably maybe you have to pay him, maybe not, but let's say you do. You might then react by cutting his hours. His cost his production per hour is eventually going to start diminishing at a certain amount of time. So you might say all right, I'll pay you double, but just work one less hour a day or something like that, because you need to justify every hour that he works twice as much as you did before. Okay, that might be better for both of them. Where anyway, the price. Oh, sorry, that's an input price. So the input price. If the input prices increase, your supply should shift inwards. Okay, price of related outputs. So if you are a supplier of MacBooks and the price of like a substitute Intel increases, you would expect a corresponding demand increase, right? If the price of whatever the competitor to MacBook is, ThinkPads, right? Lenovo ThinkPads. If Lenovo ThinkPads increase their price, you'd expect people to want more MacBooks, right? If you know in advance that people will buy MacBooks, you then are probably going to increase your production of MacBooks, just expecting future demand increases. That being said, I really don't like this one. When I give you a problem about substitutes and substitutes and complements, I want you to take it I don't want you to be speculative on this one. So I'm going to X this one out because I do want you to learn it. It is important. But when I ask you this question on the test, I would rather you just move the demand in or out, because that's really the first stage of what's happening. And then this might change, but it's not necessarily likely to change. Okay. Changes in expectations. Again, kind of similar. So if you expect oil to be more expensive in 1 year, you might cut your production of oil now and wait a year in order to see maximum price. So you might be selling less oil and kind of hoarding it until next year. Okay. The size of the industry. So if just like when population increased on the demand side, if additional suppliers are now there, you're going to increase the supply. Okay, so as more and more businesses, as there are more and more Chinese food restaurants in your neighborhood, the amount of Chinese food that they produce is going to increase. And just like demand, there's a difference between the change in the supply versus change in quantity supplied. Change in supply is this inward and outward shift of the supply curve. Change in quantity supplied is a change along the supply curve.